My name is Eric Lorne, and I have lived my entire life in the small town of Red Brook, tucked deep in the southern pines of Vermont's lesser-known valleys. Officially, our population hovers just under 3,000. Unofficially, that number dips by one or two every few years, usually during what locals call the Silver Weekends. That's our way of referring to the full moons. The town shuts down completely those nights. Doors locked, lights out, nobody outside past 8. I used to think it was superstition. My parents treated it like law. Every full moon, without fail, the blinds were drawn tight, the porch light turned off, and the old deadbolt clicked at precisely 7:55 p.m. My father would say the same phrase every time, like a sermon. The curfew isn't a warning, Eric, it's protection. He never explained from what. When I was a kid, I followed the rule because it felt like a ritual, part of Red Brook's charm, like the fall festivals or the volunteer firemen's breakfasts. But as I got older, I noticed how absolute it was. The grocery store, the diner, even the sheriff's office, closed. No exceptions. School events avoided the dates months in advance. No church bells rang. No cars passed after dark. The silence on those nights was thick, like the whole town held its breath. Tonight was one of those nights. I had just turned 26, and I worked maintenance at the old mill near the river, one of the only places still operating at night, though not during full moons. We'd been told to shut down the turbines early, for safety reasons. My supervisor, Dale, handed me the clipboard, his face pale under the fluorescent lights. "Lock up tight," he said. "Make sure the west gate's latched this time. Don't linger." The way he said it, "don't linger," stuck in my head. By 7:20 p.m., I was the only one left at the mill. The others had peeled off early, their trucks already gone. I'd always been skeptical of small-town traditions, but the emptiness around me felt heavier than usual. The air itself seemed to be waiting. I walked the perimeter, flashlight beam catching dust in the humid air. The west gate creaked when I pulled it shut, the padlock clicking louder than I expected. Beyond it, the woods began almost immediately. Black pine trunks and low mist crawling along the ground from the riverbank. When I looked up, the moon had just cleared the tree line, bright and uncomfortably large. It turned the fog silver, the way headlights catch smoke. I drove home along County Route 19. Every house I passed was dark, blinds drawn. The only light came from my headlights, sweeping across fences and mailboxes. Even the usual dogs that barked at passing cars were silent. By 7:45, I pulled into my driveway. My mother's house sat across the street, lights already off, though I could see the outline of her silhouette in the upstairs window. I raised a hand in greeting, but she didn't wave back. Inside, I followed the routine she drilled into me years ago. Lock both doors, check the back window latch, pull the curtains tight, turn off interior lights, but leave the hallway lamp glowing dimly. It always felt backward. Dark house, one light on, but she said it was tradition. That way, they know you're in compliance. I never asked who they were. I microwaved leftovers, sat on the couch, and scrolled through my phone. No new messages, no internet either. The Wi-Fi always went out on full moons, though the ISP claimed it was scheduled maintenance. Every time I switched to data, nothing loaded. I looked at the clock, 8:04 p.m. Somewhere outside, something thudded. Not a crash or a knock, just a dull impact, like someone had dropped a heavy bag on the sidewalk. The kind of sound that made your heartbeat pitch because it didn't belong in the quiet. I stood up and went to the window, careful not to move the curtain. From the narrow slit between fabric, I could see the street, bathed in moonlight. Everything looked too sharp, edges carved clean. The fog from the river was rolling in, soft and low. Then another thud. It came from somewhere farther down the block this time, followed by a faint scrape. The scrape went on longer than I liked. I held still, trying to pinpoint the direction. It might have been near the old post office, 3 houses down. The building had been abandoned for years, boarded up, half collapsed. Kids used to dare each other to break in during summers. Not anymore. For a moment, I thought I saw movement near it, a shadow crossing the pale street. Slow, deliberate, but when I blinked, it was gone. The scraping stopped. I let the curtain fall shut. My phone vibrated suddenly. The screen lit up with a text from Mom. Stay away from the windows. Turn off the lamp. My chest tightened. I hadn't told her I was near the window. I turned the lamp off, the room plunging into a deeper gray. I texted back, "What's happening?" The typing bubble appeared, then disappeared. No response. The air in the room had changed. You notice it when you live in quiet places. The shift in pressure, the subtle feeling that something's moving outside, like the world is listening. Another vibration, not my phone this time. It was the door. A faint, irregular rattling, like someone testing the knob, then letting go. I froze. My back was to it, halfway across the room. It came again, metal against metal. "Who's there?" I said. Voice low, no answer. I stepped closer, slow, quiet, listening. Through the door's small window, covered by thin lace curtain, I could make out a vague shape. Someone standing just beyond the porch light's reach, a human outline, still as a post. I called out again. "Hey, who is it?" The figure didn't move. I fumbled for my flashlight, aimed it through the curtain, and flicked it on. No one was there, just the empty porch, moonlight over the steps, and the faint fog beginning to drift toward the yard. My heart hammered against my ribs. I checked the lock again, still sealed, bolt steady. I looked down at the doormat, and that's when I noticed something that made my throat go dry. Footprints, bare ones. They led from the bottom of the steps right up to the door. No shoes, no tread, just skin marks in the thin layer of dust. And they were small, too small for an adult, but too wide for a child. I backed away. The sound outside had stopped again, but the silence that followed was worse. Then a voice called out, "Eric?" It was my mother's voice, from across the street, but the tone was wrong. Higher, stretched, like someone trying to remember how her voice used to sound. I stepped to the window again, careful, and looked through a sliver of curtain. Her porch light was off. The front door was closed. The street was empty. Yet the voice came again. "Eric, honey, you left your back gate open." I felt my chest go hollow. My back gate was chained. I had locked it myself before sunset. I whispered, "Mom?" No answer. Then, distant but unmistakable, came the sound of something brushing against metal, like a latch being lifted. The gate. I didn't move for nearly a full minute. Every nerve locked in place, listening to the night hold its breath again. I stood in the dark, staring toward the back of the house. The sound had stopped again, but my mind refused to. Every thought revolved around that latch, that voice, and the footprints. If someone was in the yard, they'd have to pass the side of the house to reach the back. There were motion lights there, cheap, overly sensitive ones. I'd installed myself after a raccoon problem. If anything moved, they'd trigger, but no light had come on. I told myself to move, to check, to do something. My body didn't agree. The silence outside deepened. Even the crickets were gone now. I could hear the faint buzz of the refrigerator from the kitchen, the quiet pulse of my own breathing. Then, faintly, the gate creaked again. Not a full swing, just a shift. Metal against chain. I picked up the flashlight and walked toward the back hallway. The floorboards felt loud under my feet. I stopped near the back door, trying to steady my breathing. Through the small pane of glass, the yard looked drowned in moonlight. The grass gleamed pale, silver white. The fog was thicker now, clinging close to the ground. The gate stood at the far end of the fence line, half visible through the mist. I couldn't see movement. I waited, and then, so softly it could have been imagined, the chain slid the rest of the way off the latch. That sound, the quick metallic scrape, hit me like a jolt. "Mom," I said, though I knew better. Silence. The light flicked on by itself. The motion sensor had triggered. Someone was in the yard. I couldn't see them. Not clearly, just the briefest suggestion of motion at the fence line. Something gliding through the fog, low and slow. Not the shape of a person walking upright. It was closer to the ground, too fluid. The light went off again. I stepped back from the door. My hands were shaking so badly that I dropped the flashlight. It clattered against the floor, beams spinning wild across the cabinets before landing on the curtain. The glow caught something. Handprints on the glass. 2 of them, small, smudged, pressed from the outside. I stumbled backward, heart punching hard in my chest. Then came a sound from the front of the house, a faint, rhythmic tapping, like knuckles against glass. The living room window. I turned toward it, pulse hammering. The tapping came again, faster now, as if whoever, or whatever, was out there was growing impatient. I crept forward. The curtain was drawn, but I could see a vague shadow through it, just a darker smear against the faint glow of moonlight leaking in around the edges. The tapping stopped. Then came a voice, soft, low, a man's. "Eric, open up." My throat went dry. "I just need to talk to you," the voice said. "You dropped something at the mill." It was Dale's voice, my supervisor, but it didn't sound right. There was no weight behind it, no breath, just the words. 2 even, like they'd been played back through a speaker. "I locked up early," I said. My voice cracked. "Yeah," the voice replied after a pause. "That's what I thought." The shadow outside shifted slightly, enough that I saw its outline clearer through the curtain. Tall, narrow shoulders. The head tilted too far to one side, like it was listening for something behind me. The curtain moved, not outward, inward. Something had pinched the fabric from the outside, pulling it gently. I didn't think. I just ran for the kitchen, grabbed the nearest thing with weight, a cast iron pan, and positioned myself between both doors, breathing shallow, every nerve screaming. Then, suddenly, a car engine cut through the quiet. Headlights swept across the front of my house, then froze there. A vehicle had pulled into my driveway. The voice outside stopped. For a second, everything was silent, except the soft idle of the engine. Then came a harsh knock. 3 sharp raps at the door. "Eric, it's Sheriff Bell." I didn't move. Couldn't. The sheriff's cruiser sat in my driveway, headlights glaring into the living room. The silhouette in front of the window was gone. I took a step forward, gripping the pan tighter. Another knock. "Eric, you in there?" The voice was loud, firm, exactly how I remembered the sheriff sounding. I moved to the window, pulled the curtain back a few inches. Sheriff Bell stood there, one hand on the doorframe, his wide-brimmed hat tilted back. The cruiser's light bar pulsed gently behind him, reflecting off his uniform badge. "Mind if I come in?" he asked. I hesitated. My mom's warning replayed in my head. "Stay inside." "You can't be out here, Sheriff," I said. "Curfew." He smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm the one enforcing it, son." That was true. He'd been the law here for 20 years, but something in his stance was off. He was angled slightly away from the door, as if keeping distance. "I just need to ask you a couple of questions," he said. "About what?" "Noise complaints. Couple folks thought they heard voices." He leaned closer, and for a moment, his face caught the light. His expression didn't match his tone. His eyes were wide, darting toward the trees behind him. Then, under his breath, almost too low to hear, he said, "Don't open the door. Whatever you do." I froze. He straightened again, louder now. "You hear me, Eric? You're fine inside. Stay there." He stepped back, one hand going to his radio. The headlights cut out, plunging everything back into moonlight. Then the cruiser rolled slowly backward down the street, its taillights dimming until they vanished into fog. I stood there, stunned. Had he really been there? I walked back to the living room window and peered out again. The street was empty, still blanketed in that heavy silver light. My mother's house remained dark. That was when my phone buzzed again. A new text. From Mom. "He's gone. Do not open the door until morning." My heart was pounding so hard, I could barely read. I started to type a reply but stopped when I realized something. My mother didn't text. She had an old flip phone she used for calls only. She'd refused to upgrade. I stared at the message for a long time, the glowing letters searing against the dark room. Then the screen flickered once and went black. No power. I reached for the flashlight and turned it toward the hallway. The beam wobbled with my shaking hand. That's when I noticed something new. Near the back door, the footprints on the glass were gone, wiped, clean, and below the doorknob, pressed into the thin layer of dust on the wood, was a small mark, like a fingertip, just one. Then came the faintest whisper from outside, soft and close. "Eric, honey, you left your backlight on." The voice was gentle, familiar, coaxing. This time I didn't move toward the door. I didn't answer. I turned off the flashlight instead and stood in the dark, counting my breaths until the whisper faded. But it didn't fade. It shifted from the back door to the side wall to just beneath the window beside me. And then came a sound I can never unhear. The slow drag of a nail along glass, circling the frame. I backed into the hall, heart hammering so loud it drowned out everything else. The sound followed, scraping low, methodical, then silence again. The night outside was absolute. No more voices, no more footsteps, only the hum of stillness and the feeling, impossible to shake, that something out there was watching the house breathe. The clock on the wall had stopped at 11:42. The power still hadn't come back. I sat on the floor of the hallway, back against the wall, flashlight off, breathing through my shirt to muffle the sound. Outside, everything was so quiet that I could hear the creak of the rafters settling, but every now and then, beneath it, came another sound. Light, uneven, like someone dragging their feet across gravel. It circled the house once, slow, then again, closer. I knew every creak of this place, every sound it made in the wind. This wasn't wind. At one point, something brushed against the siding. Not a knock, not deliberate, more like a shoulder grazing it. The footsteps stopped under the kitchen window. I could picture the scene without seeing it. The grass wet with fog, the moon reflecting off the pane, the faint smudge of a handprint forming there again. I shut my eyes. A sudden thunk came from the back door, sharp enough to make me jolt. Then another, and another, 3 in a row. Something or someone was throwing small stones. They hit in rhythm, then a pause, and again. It took me a second to realize it wasn't random. The hits were spaced out like a code. 3, then 2. 3, then 2. Over and over. I couldn't make sense of it, but I remembered something from when I was little. How my dad used to signal the neighbors across the street during blackouts by tapping the flashlight on the window. He'd said, "It's how we know who's still home." Was someone trying to do that now? I crept toward the kitchen, keeping low. The window was fogged from inside, condensation catching the moonlight. Another stone hit, then another. I whispered, "Who's out there?" Silence. Then, faintly, a voice I almost recognized. "Eric, it's me." My heart nearly stopped. "Mom?" "Yes, honey. It's all right now. You can open the door." Every instinct I had screamed no. But hearing her voice, that exact tone she used when I was sick as a kid, made my resolve waver. "Prove it's you," I said. A pause. Then she said something only she could have known. "You still keep the spare key behind the porch light, don't you?" I felt the floor tilt beneath me. I had kept it there until last month. I'd moved it after she scolded me for it. How would anyone else know that? I stepped closer, whispering, "What happened to the sheriff?" "He's gone," she said softly. "He left. Everyone's gone. You need to come with me." The voice was tender, steady, but there was something hollow in it, like a recording with no background noise, no wind, no breath, no world around it, just the voice, floating. I forced myself to look through the window. At first, all I saw was the reflection of the flashlight beam I'd forgotten to turn off. Then, behind it, a faint shape, a person standing just outside the door. The fog moved around them, but they didn't move at all. Then I saw the hand, pressed against the glass again. Only this time, there were 2. Side by side, I backed away slowly, reached for the flashlight, and turned it off. The knocking stopped. The silence that followed was somehow louder. I sat there, motionless, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. After maybe 10 minutes, I finally exhaled. And then, from behind me, the sound of my landline phone started ringing. It was buried under papers on the counter. I hadn't heard that ringtone in months. The sound sliced through the quiet, shrill and jarring. I lunged for it and picked up before it could ring again. "Eric?" It was my mother's real voice, not the soft, coaxing one from outside. This one was breathless, tight with panic. "Mom?" "Eric, listen to me carefully. Don't open the door. Don't look outside anymore." "I know," I said. "Someone's out there. They sounded like you." Her voice broke. "They're not me. Whatever you hear, whatever you see, it's not me. Stay low. Wait for morning." Her words were so frantic that I almost missed the sound behind them. A low, distant rumbling, like wind or a vehicle engine. "Where are you?" I asked. She didn't answer. Then, muffled, I heard her whisper something to someone else. A man's voice replied in the background, rough and clipped. Then the line went dead. I stood there, phone in hand, listening to the faint click of the dial tone. My house felt smaller, suddenly, like the walls were closing in. I turned off the phone's base unit and sat by the hallway again, back to the wall, flashlight in my lap. Time dragged. The moon hung in the same place. My eyes kept flicking to the dark window. Around midnight, I heard tires on gravel. Headlights again, cutting through fog. I crawled to the front window, heart hammering. A pickup truck rolled to a stop in front of my house. I recognized it immediately. My mother's. The door opened. She stepped out, wearing the same robe I'd seen her in earlier that evening through the upstairs window. She was barefoot, her hair loose. She looked up at my house, straight at my window, and waved. I almost opened the door right then, but something in the way she waved stopped me. It was too slow, too even, like she'd practiced it. Then I saw another figure in the driver's seat. It leaned forward, just enough for the dashboard light to hit its face. Sheriff Bell. He looked exhausted. His eyes found mine through the glass. He shook his head, once, sharp. Then the truck's engine roared, and they drove off again. The fog swallowed the taillights. I stood there trembling, realizing I didn't know what I'd just seen. My mother being driven away from me, or something wearing her face being taken somewhere else. The quiet returned, thicker than before. I retreated to the back of the house, away from the windows. I couldn't tell time anymore. The power was still out. The clock still stuck at 11:42. At some point, I must have dozed off. I woke to the faint creak of the back door opening. I sat up instantly. The sound was so careful, it almost sounded polite. Then came footsteps, soft, bare, moving across the kitchen floor. My throat closed. I gripped the flashlight, but didn't turn it on. Eric? The voice again. My mother's. "I found the spare key," she said. The floorboards creaked closer. I held my breath. Then she spoke again, right outside the hallway. "You locked the window this time." The flashlight slipped from my hand and clattered. The sound echoed like a gunshot. The footsteps stopped. Then, slowly, they turned and went the other way, toward the front door. I stayed crouched there until I heard the latch click softly shut again. For a long time, I didn't move. When I finally stood, my legs were shaking so badly I could barely hold my weight. I edged toward the kitchen. The back door was closed. The chain was hooked. Everything looked untouched, except for one thing. The spare key, my actual one, was lying on the counter, wet with dew. I stared at that key for what felt like an hour, trying to convince myself it had always been there. But I knew the truth. I had moved it weeks ago, and no one else had a reason or a way to bring it back. I reached out, half expecting it to vanish when I touched it. It was cold, slick with moisture. When I rubbed my thumb over the metal, something dark smeared across it. Not mud, grease maybe, or something thicker. My hands were trembling. Somewhere outside, a low engine rumbled and faded again. Probably the sheriff's cruiser, I told myself, making rounds. But the sound didn't move like a car. It didn't fade evenly. It pulsed, distant, then near, like it was circling. I pocketed the key and backed away from the counter. My flashlight beam caught the clock again, still frozen at 11:42. The generator at the mill should have kicked in hours ago if the town's grid went down. It never stayed dark this long. That's when I remembered the radio, my dad's old ham set in the closet. He used to use it for storms, to talk with the volunteer fire guys when the power lines fell. I dug it out, brushed the dust off, and twisted the dial. Static. I adjusted the frequency, fine-tuning past bursts of noise until a faint voice broke through. Copy that. Roadblocks in place. Maintain interior perimeter. My heart leapt. Someone was out there. I turned the volume up, pressing my ear close. Keep all units off Main Street after midnight. Repeat. No contact, no lights, no sirens. The voice crackled. Then another one came on, lower and faster. Negative visual confirmation. Possible decoys moving between residences. Advise civilians. Remain sealed in place until daylight. Decoys. The word hit me harder than it should have. Before I could process it, the static swallowed their voices again. I set the radio down, staring at it, pulse in my ears. There were others awake tonight. Law enforcement, emergency services, and they were scared enough to stay dark. That alone told me everything I needed to know. A metallic tap sounded behind me. The back door again. This time, not a knock, more like something brushing along the handle. Deliberate, but gentle. I aimed the flashlight. The beam fell on the curtain. The fabric twitched, barely moving. Then I realized it wasn't the curtain moving. It was the door breathing. The frame flexing under faint pressure from the outside, like someone pressing their forehead against it. The sound of air leaking through the gap made my stomach twist. I whispered, "Go away." The noise stopped. Then came another sound. Footsteps on the porch boards. Not fast, but unsteady. Then a pause. Then the long groan of the porch. Swing moving just once, as if someone had sat down. I didn't go near the window. Instead, I backed into the hallway and sat there again. Flashlight off, holding the radio tight in both hands. Minutes passed, maybe hours. I could feel the fatigue settling in, dull and cold. My eyelids drooped. I forced them open again and again, until eventually, the soft hum of dawn began to creep through the air. Barely perceptible, but different from the heavy stillness of night. The light outside had shifted, faint gray replacing silver. For the first time in hours, I thought about leaving, about running to my mother's house, seeing for myself that she was safe. But when I approached the front window, my breath caught. The fog was gone. The street was empty. And every door on the block, every single one, was standing open. Front doors yawning wide, some crooked, some hanging on hinges, curtains fluttering in the cold air. Not one house remained sealed, except mine. I gripped the doorknob, torn between fear and disbelief. Maybe people were venturing out already. Maybe the curfew had lifted early, but the silence outside said otherwise. No birds, no footsteps, just the wind through open hallways. I decided to wait until the sun actually rose. Another half hour, maybe less. The radio sputtered again, sharp enough to make me jump. Containment holding. Dawn clearance in 60 minutes. Do not engage visual contact with unknown subjects. Maintain internal lockdown. I froze, leaning in closer. Then a pause, and almost like someone had turned to face the microphone directly, a whisper. Redbrook civilian. You are being monitored. Stay where you are. Static followed. They knew I was listening. My first instinct was disbelief. Some local emergency broadcast, maybe, but that whisper wasn't automated. It had intention. I backed away from the radio, uneasy. Then I noticed something outside the window. Again, movement. Someone, no, several people were walking down the street, slow, uneven steps, like sleepwalkers. They moved in a line, one after another, heads tilted slightly upward, staring at the sky. The light was growing, dawn pushing faint orange along the horizon. Their faces caught it just enough for me to see. Blank, unfocused, not quite there. I recognized one of them, Mr. Keene, my old history teacher. He'd retired 2 years ago. I hadn't seen him in months. He was barefoot, wearing only pajama pants and a thin white shirt, his skin pale in the half-light. He turned his head as he passed my house, eyes unfocused, lips moving silently. Behind him shuffled 2 others, neighbors from across the street. The Flints, both in slippers, hands dangling at their sides. They walked until they reached the bend where the road met the woods. Then they stopped. All of them looked upward in the same direction. At first I thought they were watching the sunrise, but they weren't facing east. They were staring toward the ridge above the river. Something up there glinted, metal catching the first beam of daylight. I raised the flashlight, angling it against the window glass to cut glare. Through the trees, barely visible, was a structure. It looked like a communications tower, but there wasn't one on that ridge. I knew every landmark in this valley. Then came the faint hum again, the one I'd mistaken for an engine earlier. It was coming from that direction, low and steady. The line of people stood motionless. The hum deepened, and then, as one, they began to walk again, toward it. I pressed my palm to the glass, whispering, "What are you doing?" No one looked back. The last person in the line was a small figure, wearing a robe. My mother. Her pace was slow, almost floating. She didn't look left or right, just forward, into the woods. I nearly tore the door open. My hand was already on the lock when the radio burst alive again. Civilians remain indoors, subjects under influence. Visual contact may trigger imitation response. Imitation response. I froze, eyes on my mother's retreating figure. She reached the edge of the fog and vanished into the trees. The others followed. Then the hum faded, and the world went still again. I sank to the floor, shaking, watching the sky lighten by degrees. The curfew would lift soon. The siren would sound, signaling safe hours. It always did. But when it finally wailed through the valley, distant and thin, I couldn't bring myself to move. I waited until the light fully broke over the horizon. Then slowly, I unlocked the door. The air outside was cold, damp, heavy with dew. My shoes left clear prints on the sidewalk as I stepped out. The street looked normal again. Doors closed, curtains still, as if nothing had happened. But down the road, toward the river ridge, the fog still lingered like a curtain, faintly shimmering in the daylight. I thought I heard movement from inside one of the houses behind me. When I turned, the front door of my mother's house was half open again. Something soft hit the porch rail, just once, like a hand brushing wood, and through the half-open doorway, a small shape moved, slow, steady. Then a familiar voice drifted out, quiet, almost casual. "Morning, honey. You left your light on." The siren faded to a steady hum that trembled through the hills and died away. Morning light filled the street, but it didn't feel like morning. The colors were too washed out, like everything had been bleached overnight. I stood in my doorway, half expecting someone, anyone, to step out and wave, the way folks did after storms. But every door that had been open earlier was now closed again. Curtains hung perfectly still, the stillness pressed against my ears. Across the street, my mother's door was half open, just as before. I called her name once. The sound didn't carry far. It felt like the air swallowed it. I took one step onto the porch. The wood was damp, darkened by dew. Another step down the stairs. Each sound, shoe on plank, heel on gravel, echoed too sharply in the silence. When I reached the sidewalk, I saw tracks in the thin layer of dew. Bare footprints heading toward my mother's house, crossing back again, overlapping in loops, not one pair of shoes among them. The prints ended at her porch. I climbed the steps. The air smelled of cold coffee and something faintly metallic. Mom? The interior looked untouched. Curtains drawn, chairs aligned. The same porcelain figurines, lined across the mantel. A mug sat on the table beside her armchair. The surface of the coffee inside was still, cold, a pale scum floating at the rim. The floor creaked somewhere deeper in the house. I froze. It came again, slower this time. I followed the sound through the hall, past the kitchen. A thin draft slipped through a cracked window over the sink. When I reached the back room, I saw the source of the noise. One of the wooden closet doors swaying slightly on its hinge. The rhythm didn't match the breeze. I reached out and stopped it with my hand. The wood was cold. For a second, I thought I saw something through the narrow gap. A pale sleeve, just at the edge of sight. But when I yanked the door open, the closet was empty, except for coats and boxes. I shut it fast and leaned against the wall, breathing hard. When I looked down, the floor near my feet was marked with faint streaks, like something had been dragged toward the door. I backed away. Whatever had happened here, it wasn't something I wanted to understand alone. The sheriff's office was less than a mile away. I decided to go there, walk fast, stay on open streets, avoid looking anywhere too long. The air outside had that quiet after-rain quality, except it hadn't rained. My shoes left clear impressions in the dust. As I passed other houses, I noticed subtle details that weren't right. Mailboxes open, curtains twisted slightly out of place, a window with condensation inside the glass instead of outside. When I reached Main Street, I saw the barricade, a simple wooden sawhorse with reflective tape and a paper notice tacked to it. Full moon protocol. All residents remain indoors until further notice. Town services suspended. It wasn't handwritten. It had the town seal, printed cleanly, like it had been prepared long before tonight. Behind the barricade, the sheriff's building stood with its blinds drawn. The cruiser I'd seen last night was parked out front. Its door hung open. I walked up slowly. Sheriff Bell. The door to the station creaked. When I pushed it, inside smelled of stale coffee and ozone from old electronics. A radio crackled on the desk, tuned to some open frequency. Unit 4 reporting. Perimeters clear. 0 visuals. Then static. I circled the counter. Papers were scattered. Incident reports. Curfew enforcement logs. All stamped with the same date. One line caught my eye. 40. Auditory mimicry confirmed near Riverside District. Officers instructed to shelter in place until 600. Auditory mimicry. I swallowed hard. The phone on the desk blinked with missed calls. I lifted the receiver, pressed playback. The first message was my own voice. Sheriff, it's Eric Lorne. I think someone's outside my house. I slammed it down before the rest played. There were more messages, dozens, some garbled, some only a few seconds long, but one, about midway through, was clear. Bell here. If anyone hears this before dawn, stay inside. They're drawn to movement, to recognition. Don't answer if it sounds familiar. Then the recording ended in a long scrape, like a chair being dragged. I stood still, staring at the silent phone. When I turned toward the window, something flashed at the edge of my vision. Across the street, someone was standing near the grocery store, facing me. They wore a flannel shirt and jeans, posture loose, almost casual. Then they lifted one arm and waved. I took a step closer to the glass. It was me. Same clothes I'd worn yesterday, same torn cuff on the sleeve. He, or it, lowered his arm, tilted his head, and smiled faintly. Then he stepped backward, into the shadow of the building, and was gone. My stomach lurched. I stumbled to the back door of the station, kicked it open, and stepped into the alley for air. The smell hit me first. Metal and damp earth. A dark puddle ran from under the trash bins toward the drain. Something rustled to my left. Eric? The voice came from near the corner. I turned the flashlight on instinctively, beam catching the brick wall, and then her. My mother stood there, barefoot, hair tangled, eyes wide and wet like she'd been crying. Mom, I breathed. How did you? She shook her head quickly. Don't come closer. Her voice was her own again, hoarse, real, trembling. They took the others, she said. The sheriff tried to move them out before dawn. They didn't make it far. I wanted to ask what she meant, but she was already backing away. They listened. Every sound. Just stay quiet. And when you see me again, ask what I burned in the kitchen last Thanksgiving. If I don't answer right, don't trust me. Before I could speak, she turned and ran down the alley toward the trees. I followed to the corner, but when I looked down the road, she was gone. Only her footprints remained. Bare, small, darkened with mud. The hum started again, distant but growing louder, not mechanical this time, more like a low resonance that shook the air. From the ridge beyond town, a plume of pale smoke began to rise. I stepped back toward the sheriff's lot, shielding my eyes from the glare of early sun. That's when I saw the writing on the cruiser's door, etched into the dust with a fingertip. Curfew does not end at dawn. The hum deepened, rolling through the valley like thunder. I ran, past the station, past the empty houses, back toward my street. The sunlight didn't feel like safety anymore. It felt like exposure. When I reached my house, the front door was wide open. Inside, everything looked the same as I'd left it, except for the radio on the table. It was on again, dial flickering faintly. I turned the knob. A voice spoke through the static, calm and measured. Eric Lorne, you're advised to remain indoors until secondary clearance. Town status, under containment. I pressed the speaker close to my ear. Who is this? Silence. Then, softly, you still haven't learned to lock the window. The line went dead. I turned slowly toward the kitchen. The window above the sink stood open again. Curtains barely moved in the faint breeze. And on the counter, next to the wet key I'd pocketed earlier, lay a second one, identical, still dripping, as though just placed there. For a long time, I just stared at the two keys. They were identical, the same bent tooth on the end, same worn groove down the middle. One of them was the real key I'd used for years. The other I didn't know. I picked them up side by side. The fake one felt colder, not just cool to the touch, cold all the way through, as if it hadn't come from this house or this air. A sound outside broke the stillness, tires crunching on gravel. I went to the window, keeping low. A black SUV was rolling slowly down the street. Tinted windows, no license plates. It stopped in front of my house. The driver didn't get out. For a moment, nothing moved. Then the back door opened, and two people stepped out, wearing gray jackets marked with yellow tape. No words, just a triangular symbol, like a hazard sign. They didn't look around. They went door to door, knocking once, waiting 3 seconds, then moving to the next. Every door, every house. When they reached mine, one of them raised a small handheld device that chirped quietly. The other wrote something on a clipboard. Then, without knocking, they stepped back and signaled toward the SUV. The window rolled down halfway. A man inside lifted a radio to his mouth and spoke, but I couldn't hear the words through the glass. He listened, nodded once, then rolled the window up again. The SUV idled there another minute, then drove away. I didn't move until it vanished around the bend. When I stepped onto the porch, I saw what they'd left behind. A piece of paper taped to my mailbox. House 22. Compliant. Remain inside until clearance signal. At the bottom, in small print, issued by Division E. Interim command. I peeled it off and turned it over. Nothing on the back. Down the street, other houses had the same notice flapping faintly in the wind. That hum from the ridge hadn't stopped. It was steadier now, rhythmic, like machinery, settling into a pattern. I went back inside, locked the door, and turned the radio back on. Static again. Then, faintly, voices. Containment perimeter stable. 3 sectors cleared. Residual movement at river access confirmed. Then another voice, firmer, closer to the mic. Advise remaining civilians to report visual anomalies, to command at safe light only. Direct contact prohibited. Anomalies. I switched it off before my pulse could spike further. The air in the kitchen was heavy and warm, like the power had been out too long. I opened the fridge just to feel the cold air rush out. That's when I noticed the clock on the microwave. It was on again, flashing 12. The power had come back. The fridge compressor hummed quietly. Normal, domestic. For a moment, that ordinary sound was the most comforting thing I'd ever heard. Then came the smell, faint at first, then sharp and sweet, like burnt plastic and spoiled fruit. It seeped in from somewhere near the back of the house. I followed it to the hallway. The air grew thicker, harder to breathe. The door to the guest room was ajar. I nudged it open. The curtains were drawn tight. Light leaked in at the edges, outlining something sitting on the bed. A shape. I stepped closer, heart drumming in my throat. The shape was a bundle. My spare clothes, folded neatly. Someone had stacked them there, but underneath them, dark stains had soaked through the quilt. When I pulled the blanket back, I found my work uniform from the mill, muddy, torn, and still damp. I hadn't worn it since yesterday morning. It shouldn't have been there. I'd left it hanging on the line behind the house. I dropped the blanket, stepped back, and hit the wall. That smell filled the room again. I turned to the window. The curtains fluttered once, and then I saw my reflection. Or I thought I did. It wasn't moving right. It blinked a second, later than I did. I turned off the light, stepped backward, and closed the door. For the first time since this all started, I felt something break inside my chest. Not fear, exactly, but the slow realization that whatever rules I thought governed this town didn't apply anymore. At 10:03 a.m., the siren sounded again. Short, clipped, 3 bursts. I went to the front window. Down the street, the same black SUV was back. This time, it stopped at the corner, where a dozen people had gathered, some in uniforms, others wrapped in blankets, dazed. I recognized a few. Mr. Keene, one of the Flints. My mother wasn't among them. A man with a loudspeaker stepped out. His voice echoed down the block. Residents of Redbrook, remain calm. You'll be escorted to the community center for screening and supplies. Do not separate from your assigned group. Screening. I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside. The sunlight felt unreal after the night. When I reached the group, the man with the loudspeaker turned toward me. His eyes flicked over my face, then to the clipboard in his hand. Name? Eric Lorne. He checked the list. House 22. Yeah. He hesitated, then drew a small circle beside my name. You'll stay with this group. Don't wander off. He motioned for 2 others to escort us. The SUV rolled slowly behind as we walked. Every few houses, someone would step out, blinking hard against the light. Silent, we passed mail scattered across lawns, bicycles tipped over, toys half buried in dew. At the corner near the diner, another convoy waited. White trucks with tarps over the back. Men in respirators moved among them, spraying something that hissed faintly when it hit the ground. The man with the loudspeaker kept repeating the same phrase. Remain orderly. Full debrief at the community center. No one spoke. When we turned onto Main Street, I saw the ridge again through the gaps between buildings. The smoke was still there, thinner now, curling lazily into the blue sky. We stopped in front of the town hall. Folding tables had been set up outside, stacks of bottled water, and boxes labeled medical. A woman in uniform handed each of us a small plastic card and said, "Keep this visible. Do not trade or discard." The card had a barcode and a date stamp. Clearance pending. Redbrook Zone. EI took a bottle of water, cracked it open, and drank. It tasted faintly metallic, like old pipes. Then I saw him. Sheriff Bell. He was sitting on the steps of the hall, head bowed, hat in his hands. His uniform was filthy, streaked with ash. I approached slowly. "Sheriff," he looked up. His eyes were bloodshot, face drawn tight. "Lorne," he said quietly, "you made it. What happened?" He stared past me toward the ridge. They're calling it a containment breach. Some kind of test signal from the old communications site up there. But no one's giving straight answers. I sat beside him. "Where's my mother?" He didn't answer right away. They've been rounding up anyone found outside after dawn. If she's not here yet, she's with the second group. He rubbed his temples, then added under his breath, "If she's still herself." I felt the words like a punch. Before I could respond, the loudspeaker crackled again. "All residents remain inside the perimeter. Do not approach the ridge. Repeat, do not approach the ridge." The sheriff stood slowly. "They'll tell us to stay calm." "They always do. But you and I both know this isn't over." He looked at me then, really looked, and said something that chilled me more than anything that night. "Whatever's in this town now, it knows us better than we know ourselves." The air outside the town hall felt suffocating, thick and unnaturally warm for early spring. The longer I stood there, the more I realized how little of it seemed real. The fog had lifted by now, but something about the clarity felt off, too sharp, like I was seeing through the wrong lens. Sheriff Bell stood beside me, his hat pulled low over his eyes. He wasn't looking at me. He was watching the ridge. His hands were trembling, just slightly, and I could tell, from the way he stood, that he wasn't the same man who'd lived in this town for years. The woman at the table who handed out the medical kits had eyes like a hawk. Her clipboard never stopped moving, ticking off names, glancing up, marking things down. The tension in the air was thick enough to swallow any attempt at normal conversation. No one spoke. Everyone just waited. Finally, Bell spoke again, his voice low but urgent. You and I both know this isn't a containment breach. It's been building. We just didn't see it coming. I nodded, though I wasn't sure what he meant by that. I couldn't stop thinking about the feeling from the night before, the knowing, the way everything in Redbrook seemed just a little bit too perfect, too controlled. I glanced back toward the town square. The sunlight that had cut through the fog earlier was now fully in the sky, casting long shadows across the parked cars and empty streets. But the houses, they were too still, like they were waiting for something. The sheriff gestured toward the ridge with his chin. I'm going up there. You coming? Where else would I go? I answered, though the question felt more like a formality. I'd been stuck here, in Redbrook, since I could remember, but now something inside me knew that if I didn't follow him up that ridge, if I didn't get some answers, I'd be stuck forever, caught in a cycle of waiting, listening, and never seeing the whole picture. We didn't wait for permission. As we crossed the road toward the tree line, I noticed how quiet the rest of the town was. No more strange vehicles, no more people walking, just an oppressive silence that made the ground feel heavier with every step. At the edge of the trees, Belle stopped and turned back toward me. Whatever happens up there, Lorne, don't get involved. You don't know what you're looking for. You don't know what you might find. I felt my stomach tighten, but I kept my mouth shut. We moved quickly through the brush, taking a winding trail that Belle seemed to know by heart. The air grew denser the higher we climbed, the trees thinner, as if we were crossing some invisible boundary. I felt a shift as we moved out of Redbrook's grip, like leaving behind the false peace that had settled over the town. It didn't feel like a hike anymore. It felt like a journey to the heart of something darker. Bell kept his pace steady, but every now and then he glanced over his shoulder, checking that I was still behind him. Something about him had changed. Maybe it was the way his hands clenched against the rifle slung over his shoulder, or the way his breath came quicker, like he knew something was waiting for us, and he didn't want to acknowledge it. The ridge wasn't far from town. We reached it by noon, the sun now harsh above us, but even that light felt wrong. Too bright, too oppressive. I could see the remains of the old communications tower in the distance. It had been abandoned for years, barely more than a rusted skeleton against the skyline. But now, there was something new up there. A light, faint but steady, pulsing from the tower itself. Bell stopped at the base of the ridge, just before the rise. He squatted down, checking his rifle once more. We'll move up slow. No sudden movements. If anyone is up there, anything, we don't want to be seen. The ground was soft underfoot, covered with leaves, dead branches, and the occasional patch of dry moss. The wind had died down, leaving a suffocating stillness. My breath echoed unnervingly in the air as we started to move up the final stretch toward the tower, and that's when I heard it. A hum. It wasn't the low, mechanical hum I'd heard before, but a different kind, like a sound vibrating from deep inside the earth, a frequency that tugged at my chest and made my teeth itch. It vibrated in my skull. Bell's hand shot up, signaling for me to stop. His eyes narrowed, focusing on something ahead. He lowered to a crouch and pulled me with him, motioning for silence. I froze. The sound was clearer now. It wasn't just the hum of machinery, it was a chorus. Voices, soft and indistinct, layered over one another like echoes. Too many voices at once, barely human, almost mechanical in their rhythm. It felt like they were calling out from all directions, and at the heart of the noise, I could hear something worse, something darker, like a scraping, dragging sound, something trying to claw its way out from the inside. I swallowed hard. Bell pulled out his radio, but his hand trembled as he turned the dial. "Command, do you copy? Command, do you read?" The radio buzzed back to life, but the words that followed didn't sound like the command structure I knew. Containment breach. Repeat. Containment breach. Signal lost. Repeat. Signal lost. Bell cursed under his breath. He pulled the antenna down and muttered to himself. "What the hell is happening?" I whispered. Bell looked at me. His face was pale. His jaw clenched tight. "It's happening," he muttered. "This wasn't a test. This was never about containment. This was about control." He turned and motioned for me to follow. We reached the final rise of the ridge, where the tower loomed. The light from it pulsed once, then again, faster. Each pulse seemed to resonate in my chest, rattling my bones. It was as if the tower wasn't just broadcasting signals. It was reaching for something. At the base of the tower, a strange figure appeared. A person, or something that resembled a person, stood motionless in front of the metal latticework. The figure was completely still, but there was something unsettling about it. The way its arms hung by its sides, too rigid. The way its face, covered by a thin, gray mask, stared directly at us without blinking. Bell stepped forward, but I grabbed his arm. "What the hell is that?" "That's not a person," he said quietly. "That's something else." Before I could ask what he meant, the figure moved, but not like a human. It was too smooth, too fast. The legs bent unnaturally, and the body twisted in a way that made me shudder. The arms extended in long, jerky motions, like a puppet on strings. The mask on its face was featureless, just a smooth slab of gray that gleamed in the light, and then it spoke. Its voice was a hollow, distorted version of my own. "Eric Lorne, we've been waiting for you," I recoiled, instinctively pulling away from Bell. But he grabbed me by the wrist and yanked me back toward the trees. "We need to go," he said urgently. "Now." Before I could react, the figure moved again, faster than before, and I could hear the screeching of metal behind me. The tower shook. Something was awakening. Something alive. Bell's grip on my wrist was iron. "Run!" he hissed. We stumbled downhill, branches whipping our faces. Behind us, the hum from the tower deepened into a metallic roar that vibrated through the soil. My ears rang. I could taste copper on my tongue. We didn't look back until we hit the tree line. From there, we could see the ridge silhouetted against the pale sky. The tower pulsing like a heartbeat. Figures were moving around its base now, dozens of them. Bell swore under his breath. "They're the townspeople." The shapes swayed together, heads tilted upward toward the flashing beacon. I recognized some of them. Mr. Keene, the Flints, the couple who ran the diner. They moved in unison, like reeds bending in wind that I couldn't feel. "Sheriff," I whispered, "what is that thing doing?" He wiped sweat from his brow. "Transmitting," but not outward. Then to who? He didn't answer. He just started back toward town, jaw set, breathing hard. The descent took half an hour, though it felt longer. Every few steps, the hum would swell, then fade, as if the ridge itself were breathing. By the time we reached the first houses, the sky had dimmed with a sudden sheet of gray. Clouds rolled in from nowhere. The main street was empty again. The convoy and officials were gone. Tables overturned, bottles scattered, a paper notice skidded past in the wind. Secondary evacuation delayed. Await further instructions. Bell slammed his radio against his palm, then thumbed the switch. Command, this is Bell. Respond. Static. Then faintly, a voice. A signal compromised. Remain in shelter until the rest dissolved. Bell's expression hardened. They pulled out. Pulled out? I echoed. He nodded grimly. Whatever's happening here, they don't plan on fixing it. They plan on containing it. I thought of my mother, of her robe trailing through fog. We can't just stay. He turned toward me slowly. You think leaving makes a difference? This town was written off before dawn. By who? The same people who built that tower. The words hit me with a strange, inevitable clarity. Of course the tower wasn't abandoned. Of course it was always active. Redbrook had been built in its shadow. Roads laid to skirt its signal lines. Houses positioned neatly along invisible arcs. A controlled grid. We crossed back toward the sheriff's office. The power lines above us hummed faintly, as if echoing the pulse from the ridge. Every street light flickered at the same rhythm. Inside the station, the air stank of ozone and wet earth. Bell moved straight to his desk and yanked open the bottom drawer, pulling out a folder marked Archive, 1984, Incident, Classified. He spread the pages across the desk, black and white photographs of the ridge, the tower under construction, men in hazmat suits, typed notes with half the lines redacted. One sentence stood out, unmarked. Auditory duplication presents highest risk of exposure during full lunar phase. Subjects display mimicry behavior and false memory retention lasting up to 24 hours. I stared at it. Mimicry behavior. Bell nodded slowly. The curfew wasn't to keep people safe from something outside town. It was to keep them from answering to something inside it. Outside, the hum changed pitch, not louder, closer. We both froze. A shadow passed the window. Bell grabbed his sidearm and motioned for silence. The shadow returned, pausing this time, just beyond the glass. I could make out the outline of a face, pressed faintly against it. Then it knocked. Once, twice, a familiar rhythm. 3, then 2. The same pattern from the night before. Bell's voice dropped to a whisper. Don't move. The door handle twitched. Sheriff Bell, a voice called softly. It's Deputy Harlan. You in there, sir? Bell went pale. Harlan's dead, he muttered. The handle turned again. Sir, it's me. You said to check back in daylight. The tone was warm, polite, a little nervous. Exactly how Harlan sounded, but the cadence was off. Each pause came half a beat too late. The voice came again, clearer now. Sir, you told me to keep the radio quiet, remember? Bell raised his gun, aiming at the door. It's not him, he whispered. The knocking stopped. A long silence followed, thick and brittle. Then, without warning, a second voice joined in, from the other side of the room. Sheriff Bell, open up. Same voice, same tone. One outside, one inside. We both turned. The interior door leading to the holding cells creaked open. Bell fired once. Reflex, not aim. The shot punched through drywall and ricocheted. The sound was deafening in the small room. When the smoke cleared, the door was swinging gently, empty. He lowered the gun, chest heaving. "We're leaving," he said. We stepped out into the street. The air was vibrating again, faintly at first, then stronger. The entire town seemed to hum. Streetlights flickered in perfect unison. The sound came from underground now, rising through the pavement. The tower on the ridge glowed bright enough to cast shadows all the way down Main Street. Bell shielded his eyes. "It's drawing power from the grid. What happens when it finishes?" I asked. He didn't answer. The first scream came from 2 blocks away. A short, sharp cry that cut off too quickly. Then another. I saw movement near the grocery store. Shapes slipping through doorways, emerging onto the street. People, familiar faces, but their movements were too synchronized, like they were responding to an invisible cue. Their mouths moved together, forming words I couldn't hear. Over the hum, Bell gripped my arm. "We go for the truck. Now." We sprinted toward the station's cruiser. The ground beneath us seemed to pulse with every step. When I looked back, the line of townspeople was forming again, heading toward the ridge. The engine turned over. On the second try, Bell slammed the gear shift, tires spitting gravel. We tore through the intersection, the town blurring past. At the base of the ridge, a barricade blocked the road. Metal fencing, orange cones, and a single sign. Restricted area. Maintenance access only. Bell didn't slow. The bumper hit the fence and sent it clattering aside. We stopped halfway up the slope. From here, the tower loomed directly overhead. Its pulse slower now, heavier. Bell cut the engine. "If it's transmitting inward," he said, "we end it from inside." I followed him up the final stretch. My legs burned, lungs raw, but I kept going. At the base of the tower, the air shimmered faintly, like heat distortion. The hum rattled in my bones. Bell found the hatch at the base and kicked it open. Inside was a small control chamber filled with humming equipment. Monitors, dials, a panel of blinking lights. He scanned the switches. Emergency shutoffs fried. On the largest monitor, a waveform pulsed in rhythm with the hum. Then the screen flickered. A live feed appeared. Our street, our houses, each one tagged with coordinates and green status bars labeled compliant or mimic active. House 22, mine, flashed red. "Bell," I whispered. "What does that mean?" He didn't answer. He was staring at the monitor like he'd seen a ghost. On another feed, a figure stood at the door of the sheriff's office. My house, my mother's house. The camera shifted between them in slow, mechanical rhythm. And then the feed froze on one frame. Me, standing in my kitchen, flashlight in hand, except I was here. I stepped back, throat dry. "That's not me." Bell's hand tightened on the console. "Then we're out of time." He reached for the wiring and yanked. Sparks flew. The hum spiked, piercing, almost sentient. The monitors went black. For 1 second, everything was silent. Then the ridge exhaled. A wave of air rippled outward, flattening the grass, shaking the trees. My knees buckled. The tower lights died. When the ringing in my ears faded, all I could hear was wind, ordinary wind. Bell was on his knees, panting, eyes fixed on the dark tower. "It's done," he said. But I wasn't sure, because somewhere down in town, through the valley air, came a faint echo. 3 knocks, then 2,